like Alice mentioned, my name is Pema Mazumdar. I use she, her pronouns. And while my parents were born in what is now known as Toronto, my parents were born in India. I was born in what's now known as Toronto, Ontario. I have two kids. One of them you can see here. It's my 3-year-old. Her name is Sai. She's pictured on this slide. And you can see she's navigating between the change in a paved road, a stream, and it was very late May, cold and rainy weather where I am. And there was summer to come. So I thought, okay, I can use this photo to go along with a presentation that's titled Changing Landscapes, What's in the Soil That's Feeding the Roots. So thanks all of you for being here and welcoming me so warmly. I'm speaking to you today from my home in Tachake, also known as Montreal, on unceded Indigenous lands that continue to be home to many Indigenous peoples. And the Ganyagahake Nation is recognized as the custodians and stewards of these lands and waters. I'm also, as was mentioned, a knowledge translation specialist at the National Collaborating Center for Determinants of Health, or NCCDH, which is hosted at St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia. And that university is located in Mi'kmahi, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So I just want to take a really quick second to reflect on the colonial and racial violence experienced in Mi'kmahi and more broadly in what is now known as Canada. And some of you have, many of you, all of you have probably had a chance over the past 2 days to think a little bit about this. But in my own journey, I've understood some of these issues, along the way differently. And fairly, I want to say more recently than I would like, I learned that slavery was established in what is now known as Quebec, where I live, through a royal mandate by Louis XIV in 1689. And in the years that followed, Black people were either enslaved or fleeing from being enslaved because slavery was only abolished in the British Empire, and that includes Canada at the time, in the year 1834. So not really all that long ago. And for me, understanding that history, alongside the history of Indigenous peoples and understanding racial and colonial violence for what it means to many different people in what is now known as Canada, is really important to any conversations that we have about promoting health and well-being for all. So I just wanted to share some of that with you, that's something that I'm continually learning about, and that I wish that I had learned more about that history earlier in my life. The NCCDH is one of 6 national collaborating centers, and you might already be familiar with many of them. They each work across Canada to strengthen public health in different ways and in different topic areas. And the NCCDH, which is the center that I represent, supports the Canadian public health community to address the structural and social determinants of health. So really what that means is that we're focused on helping people who work in public health and even the larger health system to work with others to improve both the conditions of daily life and the forces and systems that interact with these conditions. And so today we're going to talk more about those conditions and the forces and systems that drive them as we reflect on what you've all shared with each other here in the past 2 days, and as we reflect on what you're living in your everyday work. So, whoop, just take a second for this to come up here. So I'm going to use a Slido today, and I don't know if you've used this tool before or participated in something like this. There's lots of different ones out there. There's Mentimeter and Slido and a few others. But basically, if you take a device that you have, like a cell phone or an iPad or something, and you scan that QR code, it'll take you directly into something that you can respond to. If you'd prefer to just work on your computer, which you're already at, you can open up a browser, a new window of a browser, and type in slido.com, and then you can enter the number that you see on the screen, which is 3520735, and that number is not going to change for any of the questions. So I'll just give you a second to get into that. And as you get into that, I see 7 or 8 people are already typing. I want you to think about the many different contexts around you. And I heard about some of this in the breakout group that I was in just now, which was in culture as a foundation. And this is a word cloud, as you're seeing. So try and think about what's happening around you socially, politically, economically, environmentally. If you can sum it up in one or two words, that works really well. And I know we were talking about it a little bit in that breakout group, but this brings it into the larger virtual room for us all to reflect on. Okay, so we're seeing words like uncertainty, lots of change, mental inequality, chaos, fear. Okay, that's a number. I was trying to see what that was. Division, anxiety, willful ignorance, worsening natural disasters, confusion. So a lot of words that feel pretty heavy here. Unstable, declining mental health, hopelessness, stress, poverty. Okay, thank you so much for fake news. Yeah, hopelessness. It's always really interesting to see what's coming in. I think some people are still typing. I have a Zoom bar on top of where it tells me. Just 1 second. Okay, now I can see. All right. So uncertainty is taking center stage here. We have a few others that have been added, like community mistrust and misinformation. So thank you so much for that. We're going to move on to another question, but I just want you to hold all of this with you in terms of your collective context that you're experiencing. It's a lot. Okay, the next question is, how are these contexts affecting the communities that you serve, your work, you, maybe your team? What are you observing and experiencing in your practice, networks, partnerships, and projects? And this is going to come up as free text, I believe. So you can use as many words as you want. So we have stress, burnout, varying levels of trust and mistrust, people feeling socially isolated and fearful, a disconnect, a desire for change. I like that one. Breakdown of the system, increased urgency, frozen leadership, miscollaboration. It's a new one for me. I like that framing of it. Unable to plan for the future. Trust issues and unsure of future. So that uncertainty piece that was taking center stage is presenting here again. Disconnected. I see a great deal of resilience, collaboration, and community building. In my communities, people understand colonial violence has always necessitated resistance. Thank you for that. Turning inwards, protecting self. Okay, I see 7 people are still typing, so we'll just give them a second. Worsening condition, colonization of decolonization space, resistant to change, constantly changing and adapting, resiliency, frozen. Okay. Unlearning old ideologies. So thanks for that. I'm going to move us on, but if you're feeling like you really want to keep writing and, I can share these results with the organizers, they can share them back with you. Feel free to continue. All right. So how many of you are familiar with our Let's Talk series or even with the NCCDH? If you are, you can give me a thumbs up or whatever reaction you want on Zoom. I'm seeing some thumbs ups there. That's nice to know. One of our recent installments in this series is the Let's Talk Determinants of Health, which includes a tree metaphor. And there are many tree metaphors out there, but it includes a version of a tree metaphor to help think through what drives health and well-being. So we're going to go through some of that together. And it's, keep those Slidos handy because we're going to keep using it. All right. So before I even show you any kind of tree, I just want to ask, what are some of the mental and physical health outcomes that your work is most focused on addressing? And I know that might be kind of a hard question because some of your work isn't maybe framed in exactly one mental or physical health outcome way, but if you can think of some of the things you might write up in a grant proposal or in a program evaluation piece, like what are some of the outcomes that you're trying to shift? Okay, I'm seeing suicide prevention, social connection, improve family outcomes, mental health literacy, positive mental health, reduced harms. Okay, healthy child development, just trying to keep up with them. So social connection and suicide prevention, positive mental health, and coping skills are getting a lot of kind of echoes out there, although you're clearly working on a variety of health outcomes, health and mental health outcomes. Okay, thank you for that. Thanks. It's great to get an overall picture at a glance of what your work is focused on. Okay, so some of you have already discussed these sorts of things in your breakout groups before. And this is just a little bit of a reflective exercise that we can do as a wrap up. So thanks for sharing again and for being so generous. I want to ask, what are some of the behaviors, if there are behaviors that you can ascribe to all those different outcomes that influence some of those outcomes? Okay. This is a bit tricky. I'll explain. So the outcomes I'm sort of used to seeing, the small amount of times I've seen this, involve for sure some of the outcomes that you mentioned, like suicide prevention um, and and anxiety and depression. But I normally don't see, and this just shows how all of you are working in such a promotion-focused way. I normally don't see social connectedness when I ask about the health outcomes that you're working on. And so when I ask what are the behaviors that influence those outcomes, you've already named it. So I think it's great that we're seeing this sort of social connectedness come up in both places. So here are some of the behaviors that you're talking about: community and relationships, parent engagement, overuse of social media, particularly among youth. That's a good one, especially, I'm sure you talked about that a little bit in the digital breakout room. Social connectedness taking center stage here. Cultural safety. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to move us on here. So here are some of the health outcomes that we included in our tree, which was not focused just on mental health promotion in this Let's Talk. So depression is up there. Anxiety could easily be up there. Suicide prevention could have been up there. This is a select examples that we had listed, knowing that we couldn't list everything. And in our behaviors, which are the trunk here, we had diet, exercise, substance use. For some of those other physical and mental health outcomes in communities and populations, the behaviors are often contribute to that to those health outcomes, but don't always directly influence them. So it's which behaviors could indirectly or directly influence those health outcomes. And again, this tree would probably look slightly different if we were doing it just for mental health promotion. So if we move on to the next question, it's what are some of the conditions of daily life that influence these outcomes? And you've named some of them really beautifully already. So when you named social connectedness, I think that would probably be a great answer here, but there are a lot of other ones. So what are some of the conditions of daily life that influence these outcomes that you said you were working on at the very beginning? Financial security and healthcare, absolutely. Stable housing, a sense of belonging, discrimination or experiencing discrimination, connection, food security, and healthcare taking pretty center stage there. Often that kind of relates to healthcare access or the quality of healthcare, what it encompasses. Okay, I'll let the rest of the answers come in. Thanks so much, everybody. So food, access, sense of belonging, housing, healthcare, they're all up there. And lots of other pieces as well: gender-based violence, racism, Thank you for that. Great responses. So again, in the tree that we produced, that's in that Let's Talk, we listed these conditions, and we said that these were the roots. These are examples of the conditions of daily life that can directly or indirectly influence health outcomes. And we know that each of these conditions show durable hierarchical patterns, and we refer to those as health inequities. So differences in health that are systemic, unjust, avoidable. And I know that you know all of this because I've heard you speak in the past few days, but I just want to share it that's where we have those in our tree. And something that you may not have seen yet is the way that we've reframed some of those conditions of daily life. And I wonder if this would be useful for you. It's definitely not a definitive or comprehensive list, but it covers some of the conditions we think are most important. And we framed them as asset-based, interrelated goals that people like you, public health, partners in other sectors, community, and decision makers can work towards together. So goals like everyone having decent and safe working conditions, everyone having the income and resources needed to thrive, everyone having a safe and secure place to call home, high quality and accessible and comprehensive health services, nourishing and safe food, water, air, and land, a sustainable environment and habitable climate, high quality and accessible educational opportunities throughout the life course, a happy and loving early childhood environment, and finally, supportive networks and a community that provides power and belonging. So if that list, which could have more added to it, resonates with you and that asset framing resonates with you, please feel free to adapt it to your own context and use it and tell us about it, because it's really just a reflection of our best thinking at the time that we put this together. Now, at the beginning of this symposium, Dr. Kate Mulligan spoke about the very successful social prescriptions that foster these very conditions of daily life and the need to share power, especially with community. And she illustrated how important it was to matter, to be in relationship and connect with each other and in community. And I really saw that come through. It must have resonated for all of you. And I really saw it come through just in those responses that you just gave. So I think it sets us up nicely for the next question, which is what gets in the way of that happening? What gets in the way of belonging or mattering, and why? And how can we sort of position ourselves from wherever we are to do something about it? So as you reflect on that, I'm going to share a clip, and this is actually from that podcast that was mentioned when I was so nicely introduced there. And you can find it anywhere where you find your podcasts. And this is from an episode called Disrupting for Well-Being, and it's about Engage Nova Scotia, an organization that's paying a lot of attention to quality of life, social connectedness, belonging, and the impact that that all has on well-being and on health overall.
It has been strategically made over time through policy, through law, through social engineering, that poor populations, Black populations, queer populations, trans populations, women, etc., have been very specifically and particularly excluded through systematic creation. It wasn't just a coincidence that these communities are equity seeking or deserve equity because of a very particular agenda to leave populations out of being able to access power. And so I use that.
So thanks again for participating here. I'm sharing another poll. Reflecting on that and on all of those conditions that we just shared, and on your really deep, amazing reflections before, what are some of those underlying drivers, values, beliefs, policies, practices that might shape different experiences of those conditions of daily life? So somebody said white supremacy, capitalism. Yep, for sure. Racism. I think we're going to see a few more isms. Greed, privilege, colonialism. Colonialism, which is at the root of capitalism. Religion, more coming in. Sexism. Yeah, so a lot of those are those deeper driving worldviews or values, and they each have their own beliefs associated with it. So one social group is better than another socially constructed group. That one kind of person is more worthy of housing or school or being loved than another. And so those are all, and I'm not saying that I believe that, I'm saying that those are the values and beliefs that kind of go together. And we think of this Western worldview, colonialism, identity politics, individualism. More is coming in here. So thanks for all of your great answers. Oppression. We think of this as making up the soil of that tree that we were talking about. And I'll just quickly show you what we have in the soil that our tree explores. And if you are making your own tree or working backwards from the health inequities that you're most concerned about, from wherever you're working in the system and whatever you're working on, you might come up with a different mix of things. And some of the values that you have at the very, very, very bottom might be quite similar, but some of the practices and how they play out could be different and more tailored to your context. So we do have blank trees available that you can work through with your teams. If you ever want to do that exercise, let me know and I can support you to get some of those materials and maybe have a chat with you before. And yeah, so this is what we put in our tree. You named so many of these things already, so I don't feel like I need to tell you them. But we included past policies and laws like residential schooling and slavery and current policies, for example, insufficient disability benefits and current practices like hiring practices or the financialization of housing. And I think what it helps to do, from what I've seen, is it helps to get to, okay, we know housing is important, but what is it that's driving the inequitable health outcomes that are associated with that condition of daily life? And naming that financialization or naming the differential renting practices or the biased lending and renting practices it can be helpful for somebody who's trying to then target, okay, how do we act accordingly? I have another quote, quote excerpt for you here. And the reason I wanted to share this with you is because here is Danny, who's from that same episode as Camila, about Engage Nova Scotia. And he's actually talking about the soil, but he's doing it in a way that doesn't actually say any of those big words that can sound kind of scary in different contexts and that end with ism. I think it's important to name them, and I think it's reflecting on what Kate said. It's also important sometimes to use language, like she was talking about the language of social prescribing, meeting different healthcare system actors where they are. And so, what I love about the way Danny's saying this is he's saying he's talking about changing the soil, but in a really accessible way. I'm going to play it for you.
We can fix healthcare. We can fix education, justice, community services, housing. We can fix those systems potentially and still not arrive at momentum towards stronger, healthier communities because we failed to address really fundamental issues about the nature of our relationships with each other, the connections we have, and our connections to the natural world without recognizing that we need to measure and improve the water itself and not just move rocks upstream. The healthy, strong society that we're all striving for may be unachievable, and we may be on a fool's errand trying to fix them in silos instead of actually addressing something more fundamental.
Right. So that's the tree. And thank you for working through it with me. Like I said, feel free to be in touch if you have any questions or want to use it for yourselves. I wanted to move from there to a quick reflection on if you think back to what you said about your work, your current practice, your networks, your partnerships, your projects, where would you put the focus as being? And it might be on multiple levels. So maybe just pick the level that you think most works or most aligns. Okay, the Roots are maintaining a strong lead here, which is great. I mean, good for all of you. And I've heard in those breakout groups and through your presentations, you're doing some incredible work and really doing as much as what you can from where you are. But I think it's being together and hearing how each of us is working in our own context also helps to think, okay, how can we shift, go deeper? How can we move from here and start something else? And I think that's the power of these kinds of events that bring us together, where we can share our stories and experiences and promising practices. Okay, so about 30, almost an even split there between the soil, the roots, and the trunk. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you so much. I wanted to take some time. I think I have another 2 minutes. Am I right there?
You have about 5 minutes, Pema.
5 minutes. Okay, great. So I'm going to take some time to go through some concrete potential actions. And these might need to be adapted to your own context, but I'm going to share some resources and actions that the NCCDH has that you can use in whatever way makes sense for you. So this is Samia. She's a public health leader in Ontario and a community leader within the Muslim community in Ontario. And she's going to talk a little bit about breaking free of the powerlessness paradigm, which I always find really inspiring.
I think a lot of the time people are stuck in this powerlessness paradigm, thinking that someone else needs to change the policy, someone else that needs to shift the system, and they don't recognize their own power of acting from where they are and taking stock of what do I have influence over, what do I have power over. If you are designing a program, you for sure have the opportunity to put forward an equitable program that
Oh, sorry.
considers the lived experiences of the populations you serve. That mandate does not need to come from the ministry, nor your manager, nor your supervisor. That is something that you, as someone who's putting this work forward, can put that. And if you are at a decision making or a policy level, again, you are able to approve these programs, and you're able to review a program and say, hey, I've noticed that this is missing. Would you consider reviewing or including this work? So I think if there is a responsibility to do this work across all levels of public health, then we're able to move forward. However, if there is people are stuck in their roles and are not able to imagine the possibility of doing the work without having necessarily the title to do the work.
So Samia is talking about, having that kind of imagination and being able to see where you can start and how you can act and finding that agency. And so one of the first resources that I wanted to tell you about was published in 2016, and it's something that we put together for the public health community as a common agenda for public health action on health equity. And it contains 3 pillars: build a foundation for action, establish and use a strong knowledge base, and collaborate with non-health sector partners. And it might seem like these are kind of obvious things. You've talked about all of them in the past few days in different ways. But I think if you look at the actions under each of those pillars that are written about in this resource, it can provide some ideas and prompts that could be tailored to your work in whatever way makes sense. And it can sometimes help to say, okay, I can start there. So here are some of and again, in the actual resource, it goes into each of these pieces in more detail. But under Build a Foundation for Action, the resource discusses strengthening leadership commitments, building visible support from formal organizational leaders and policymakers, as well as building social and political supports by using tools like media advocacy, naming that soil, those structural drivers of inequities, more strategically in conversations in the public arena, coordinating communications campaigns to frame issues and build understanding about what drives health and well-being. And you might not always be able to do that from within your role, but something that has really resonated with me that I've heard from different people who work across the country in health and public health is the ways that they're engaged outside of their formal roles, with their professional associations, with community groups, in their parent groups that they support for their kids' schools, and in so many other ways. So, these pillars can act as idea prompts for you in your whole lives, not just your professional lives, although I'm sure there's things in there for professional life as well. The second pillar is on establishing and using a strong knowledge base, which goes beyond acting, which is both about acting on existing knowledge and evidence, but it's also about going beyond that and contributing to the evidence base. And just by being here and participating in this hub, I think you're doing some of that. You're sharing what works in many different contexts with each other. And I was on the breakout group on culture as a foundation a little earlier, and I heard about some great practice stories and really meaningful evaluation work, and how doing that evaluation and involving community in meaningful ways and sharing those results and scaling them for further impact. I think that's all part of this pillar. The third pillar, which is about collaborating, is another thing that you've probably already been talking about in your breakout groups or are doing some work in, or are seeing opportunities for within your system and within your organization, how it could be done better. And this pillar has actions like participating in long-term multi-sectoral action or advocating for policy and structural change, allocating time and resources for community engagement and political empowerment. And something we hear a lot is that practitioners don't always feel like they have time or permission to do this. So if you're in a formal leadership role or creating a program or creating space for that work, even just framing this as being something that's essential, which again, I heard in everything from that I've heard with you in the past few days, it is really powerful. So in all of these pillars, action takes place through relationships and through partnerships. And I think I'll probably just leave you with this one idea, which is that partnerships are can be a way for yourself to have the permission of not knowing and being okay with that, and looking to your partnerships to fill some gaps in knowledge and expertise. And this is from Dr. Ingrid Waldron.
I felt I had to wait to know everything to do something, that I needed to find the right expert on this to do something. And if I couldn't find that person, then I would be paralyzed. And I would say to people, just from my experience on this project, you have a place. Don't wait just to do something. You can do something now. The whole point of partnerships is to fill the gaps that you have in your experience. That's the whole point of it. You should never expect yourself to have everything. And when I think
And so if you have the energy for one last poll, I think we'll end here. And then when you get these slides, you'll see some related resources that are on the remaining slides that you can just check out on your own time. What is one thing that you can do more of, or do differently entirely from where you are with what you have? You can think of this as a checkout, like a little commitment to yourself or to your peers. Where can you start? Advocacy, ask for more resources. Work with others and build strength. Work with others' strengths and build from there. Or well, I'm adding the word organizing, but getting our power back, and I'm thinking in an organized way, yeah, building that power. Engaging with more community on the ground. Improving my own knowledge and constantly learning and growing. Partnerships and connections. More collaboration with a diversity of community partners. Continue to build and maintain relationships. Yeah, some really great responses there. And community and collaboration are emerging as themes from the useful AI that pops up at the top. Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'll just say that in here are some resources. You can scan these QR codes. I think you're going to get these these slides afterwards. And so these are just resources that you can use to, in whatever way works for you.